Ladies and gentlemen, there is an ancient truth woven into the very fabric of human existence. Those who sow destruction will in time be consumed by it. The world is not merely a random chaotic mess. It is structured in a way that ensures malevolence does not go unanswered. You see, people believe they can manipulate reality itself, that they can deceive, exploit, and corrupt without consequence. They assume that if they are cunning enough, ruthless enough, or powerful enough, they can escape the inevitable judgment that awaits them. But reality is not so easily tricked. When a person strays from the path of truth, they begin constructing their own prison. Each lie they tell, each betrayal they commit, each act of selfish ambition they pursue, these do not disappear into the void. No, they accumulate. They weigh upon the psyche, eroding the very foundation of sanity and stability. And then one day the walls come crashing down, the very forces they unleashed, the deceit, the manipulation, the cruelty, turn back upon them. Their mind fractures, their relationships crumble, their ambitions disintegrate, and the worst part, they did it to themselves. We have seen this throughout history: dictators, tyrants, corrupt leaders, each believing they could wield power without consequence. But they all meet the same fate. Paranoia grips them, fear devours them, and in the end, they are swallowed by the very darkness they once controlled. So what is the lesson here? It is simple, yet difficult. Choose truth over lies. Choose discipline over indulgence. Choose responsibility over cowardice. Because when you do, you fortify yourself against destruction. But if you refuse, if you embrace corruption and deceit, then understand this: no matter how far you run, no matter how high you climb, your own evil will come back to destroy you. The nature of malevolence. Evil is not some distant, external force lurking in the shadows, waiting to strike at random. It is something far more insidious. It is born from within, cultivated in the depths of the human soul, through deception, self-deception, and the gradual abandonment of responsibility. It is not the enemy out there that poses the greatest threat. It is the corruption that festers inside an individual, often unnoticed, until it is too late. People often believe they can engage in small acts of deceit, manipulation, and malice without consequence. At first, these actions may seem insignificant: cutting corners, betraying trust in subtle ways, rationalizing selfishness under the guise of pragmatism. They tell themselves a story: it doesn't really matter, or I had no choice, or everyone else does it. And so, bit by bit, they begin constructing a framework of dishonesty and corruption, believing they can outmaneuver reality itself. But reality is not something that can be tricked. The human mind, despite its incredible adaptability, is not designed to sustain a foundation built on lies. Every dishonest act is like a crack in the structure of one's psyche. It accumulates, it weighs, it warps the way a person sees the world. They begin to lose clarity. Their judgment deteriorates. They are forced to tell more lies to cover the first ones. Their conscience, once a reliable guide, becomes muffled, distorted, until they can barely hear it at all. This is the slow descent into malevolence, and it is a process, not an event. No one wakes up one morning and suddenly decides to embrace pure evil. Instead, they walk down the road of compromise, one step at a time, convincing themselves that they remain in control, that they can stop whenever they want, that they can turn back. But the truth is, malevolence has a cost, and it is extracted from the very fabric of a person's being. A corrupt individual does not simply harm others, they first and foremost harm themselves. They weaken their own character. They destroy their own ability to trust, to connect, to find meaning in anything beyond their own immediate gratification. And the deeper they go, the more their suffering intensifies. You see this in the faces of those who have walked too far down this path. The politician who has spent decades lying, maneuvering, and manipulating to maintain power, he cannot sleep without fear. The ruthless corporate leader who has stepped on everyone in his path, he has no true allies, no real sense of fulfillment. The addict who has deceived family and friends for years, he is imprisoned by his own cravings, his own despair. Their suffering is not random, it is the natural consequence of the path they chose. The universe, or perhaps simply the deep structure of reality, does not allow malevolence to go unpunished. A person may evade consequences for a time, but they do not escape them forever. Eventually, the burden of their own corruption becomes unbearable. Their mind turns against them. The people they have deceived abandon them. Their lies catch up. Their body deteriorates under stress and guilt. And at the final moment, when they are left standing alone in the wreckage of their own making, they are faced with a brutal truth. It was never the world that conspired against them. It was their own actions, their own choices, their own evil that came back to destroy them. The unavoidable reckoning. Evil is not a game one can play forever without consequence. People believe they can manipulate, deceive, and exploit indefinitely, that they can twist reality to fit their desires and emerge unscathed. But reality is not so easily tricked. It is structured in such a way that wrongdoing accumulates a debt that must at some point be paid. And when that day of reckoning arrives, it is often far more brutal than anyone ever expects. There is a pattern to how destruction unfolds. It does not always happen immediately. A person may cheat and win for a time. They may lie and get away with it. They may backstab their allies, betray their principles, and indulge in selfish ambition while seemingly rising in power, wealth, or influence. This illusion of success makes them bolder. They begin to believe they are untouchable, that they are the exception to the rule, that they can escape the consequences that others face. But reality has a patience that far exceeds human arrogance. Every dishonest action leaves a residue in the psyche. Every betrayal weakens the soul. Every corrupt decision erodes the foundation of stability. And like cracks forming in the walls of a great building, the damage accumulates, often unnoticed, until the collapse is inevitable. And when that collapse comes, it is devastating. The truth, long suppressed, rises with a vengeance. The lies unravel. The structures of power, built on deception, crumble. Friends turn into enemies. Health deteriorates. The mind, once sharp and cunning, becomes clouded with paranoia and fear. The past, once ignored, comes back as a relentless pursuer, demanding justice. This is the fate of those who believe they can cheat reality. History provides countless examples. Tyrants who ruled with cruelty, only to meet their end in fear and isolation. Business magnates who built empires on fraud, only to lose everything in disgrace. Leaders who silenced truth, only to be undone by the very forces they unleashed. The reckoning is not a possibility, it is a certainty. But this is not just a grand historical pattern, it is a deeply personal one as well. Individuals who act in bad faith, who live in opposition to truth and responsibility, will face their own reckoning, even if it is not as public or dramatic. A person who betrays their family will eventually find themselves alone. A person who deceives their friends will one day realize they have no one to turn to. A person who builds their life on lies will, in time, no longer recognize themselves in the mirror. And so the question is not whether the reckoning will come, it is when. The wise understand this and choose a different path. They recognize that integrity is not just a moral virtue, it is a survival strategy. They understand that facing short-term hardship for the sake of truth is infinitely preferable to delaying judgment and suffering a collapse from which they may never recover. Because in the end, the person who deceives the world also deceives themselves. And when their own evil comes back to destroy them, they will realize too late that they were never in control. Reality was. And reality always wins. The psychological burden of corruption. There is a cost to wrongdoing, and it is not merely external. It is not just about the risk of getting caught, the potential loss of reputation, or the collapse of power and influence. The real cost is internal. It is psychological. It is the gradual erosion of a person's soul, the slow disintegration of their ability to function as a stable, rational, and whole human being. People believe they can engage in deception, manipulation, and cruelty while remaining unaffected. They think they can cheat, lie, and betray without consequence as long as no one discovers their actions. But this belief is naive. The mind is not a machine that can run on contradiction indefinitely. It is not designed to sustain a life of deceit without breaking down under the weight of its own inconsistency. Every corrupt action, every dishonest word, every betrayal, it all leaves a mark on the psyche. At first, these marks may seem insignificant. A person lies and gets away with it. They feel a small flicker of guilt, but they push it aside. They betray a friend, justify it to themselves, and move on. They manipulate a situation to their advantage, feeling a brief moment of triumph. But over time, these small compromises add up. The guilt does not disappear, it merely goes underground, poisoning the subconscious. The justifications become more elaborate, more desperate. The person becomes trapped, not just by the web of lies they have spun, but by the weight of the person they have become. There is a reason why corrupt individuals, even those who outwardly appear successful, are rarely at peace. Their minds become battlegrounds of internal conflict. They are haunted by anxiety, by paranoia, by a deep and unshakable sense that something is wrong. They lose their ability to trust others because they know how untrustworthy they themselves are. They see the world as hostile because they have made it that way through their own actions. They experience an increasing sense of isolation because true connection requires honesty, and they have built their lives on deception. This is why you see so many people who have walked the path of corruption descend into self-destruction. The dictator, once powerful, becomes consumed by paranoia, seeing enemies everywhere, unable to sleep at night. The fraudster, once cunning, starts making reckless decisions, as if seeking punishment for crimes they can no longer hide from themselves. The liar, once confident, begins to slip, contradicting their own fabrications, unraveling before the eyes of those they sought to deceive. The psychological toll of malevolence is unavoidable because human beings are wired for truth. You can suppress your conscience for a while, but you cannot silence it forever. It will manifest as anxiety, depression, paranoia, addiction, even physical illness. It will gnaw at the edges of your mind, whispering in moments of quiet, reminding you of what you have done, of who you have become. And the more a person ignores this inner voice, the louder it becomes. They will try to drown it out with distractions, money, power, pleasure, substances, but nothing will suffice because at the end of the day, they are trapped with themselves. And there is no escaping the truth when the battlefield is inside your own mind. This is the hidden price of evil. It is not just that it destroys your life, it is that it first destroys you. The role of truth and responsibility. The antidote to destruction is simple, but it is not easy. Truth and responsibility. If you want to avoid being consumed by your own evil, you must first recognize that you are capable of evil in the first place. You must take responsibility for your actions, for your thoughts, for your choices. Because if you don't, reality will force that responsibility upon you in ways you will not like. Truth is not just an abstract philosophical concept. It is the foundation of a stable life. The moment you abandon truth, you begin to erode your own psychological and moral structure. You tell one lie and suddenly you must tell another to cover it up. You manipulate one person and soon you must manipulate another to maintain control. You ignore one difficult reality and it grows in the darkness, waiting for the moment to strike you down. People often lie not just to others but to themselves. They tell themselves that their actions are justified, that their corruption is necessary, that their betrayal was unavoidable. They weave elaborate stories to protect their egos, to avoid the pain of self-reflection. But deep down, they know. There is always a part of the psyche that keeps track of reality, that knows when a person has abandoned their principles. And the more a person denies that truth, the more they suffer. Responsibility is the second half of the equation. It is not enough to recognize the truth. You must also act upon it. You must take responsibility for your mistakes, for your failures, for the damage you have caused. This is hard because it requires sacrifice. It requires facing painful realities. It requires admitting fault, making amends, and doing the difficult work of rebuilding what has been broken. But responsibility is also the path to redemption. When you take responsibility, you reclaim your integrity. You stop running from your past. You stop living in fear of being exposed because you are no longer hiding anything. You gain the respect of others, not because you are perfect, but because you are honest about your imperfections and willing to confront them. People think that avoiding responsibility will bring them freedom. It does the opposite. The more you run from responsibility, the more enslaved you become. Enslaved to your own lies, to your own guilt, to your own self-imposed prison of denial. True freedom comes from embracing responsibility, from knowing that you are standing on solid ground, that your words and actions are aligned with reality. If you refuse to take responsibility, if you choose lies over truth, then understand this: your problems will not disappear. They will grow. They will gather in the darkness like a storm on the horizon. And one day they will break over you with a force you cannot withstand. The only question is whether you will face reality now, while you still have the strength to change, or whether you will wait until reality forces its judgment upon you. Because reality does not care about your excuses, it does not care about your justifications, it does not care about how clever you think you are, it only cares about what is true. And those who align themselves with truth and responsibility will build lives of strength and meaning, while those who reject them will in the end be destroyed by their own hand. The historical and personal lessons. History is filled with the wreckage of those who believed they could escape the consequences of their own actions. From corrupt rulers to deceitful businessmen, from tyrants to manipulators in everyday life, the pattern is always the same. Those who build their success on lies, exploitation, and betrayal eventually fall. And when they do, they are often destroyed by the very forces they once controlled. You can see it in the fate of dictators. How many have risen to power through manipulation and brutality, only to meet their end in disgrace, exile, or execution? They surround themselves with yes men, eliminate dissent, and believe they are untouchable. But in their paranoia, they turn against their own allies, make reckless decisions, and alienate those who once supported them. Their own fear consumes them. Their kingdom collapses, and they often meet a violent end at the hands of those they once oppressed. The same pattern plays out in the world of business and finance. Corrupt executives driven by greed manipulate the system to accumulate wealth and power. They forge documents, deceive shareholders, and convince themselves they are too smart to get caught. And for a while they succeed. They live lavishly, gaining the admiration of those who mistake wealth for wisdom. But eventually the truth catches up. The fraud is exposed. The empire crumbles. They are left disgraced, imprisoned, or worse, forced to live with the knowledge that they destroyed everything for the sake of temporary gain. And it is not just the powerful who suffer this fate. You see it in personal relationships as well. A man who deceives his family, who manipulates his friends, who uses others for his own gain. He believes he is getting away with it, but slowly he isolates himself. The people he once relied on turn away. His web of lies becomes too complex to maintain. Eventually he finds himself alone, with no one left to deceive but himself. These are not just cautionary tales, they are laws of human nature. If you build your life on corruption, that corruption will consume you. If you think you can escape reality, reality will prove you wrong. If you believe you can twist the truth indefinitely, the truth will snap back with a vengeance. But there is another lesson here as well, a lesson for those who are willing to learn. If the fate of the corrupt is destruction, then the fate of the honest is strength. Those who act with integrity may struggle in the short term, they may suffer setbacks, they may face opposition, but in the end they stand on solid ground. Because while the manipulator gains power quickly, he loses it just as fast. While the liar may deceive others for a time, he cannot deceive reality itself. And while the corrupt may seem to rise higher, their fall is always greater. So look to history, look to your own experiences, see the wreckage of those who walked the path of deception, and then make a choice. Choose the path that leads to strength, not destruction. Choose truth even when it is difficult. Choose responsibility even when it is painful. Because if you don't, if you choose corruption instead, then know this. It may take years, even decades, but one day your own evil will come back to destroy you. And on that day you will realize that you were never escaping judgment, you were only delaying it.